Welcome to Daily Chess and my analysis of the game Fabiano Caruana against Daniel Fridman from the 31st GM Dortmund tournament, the Sparkassen chess meeting 2013. And well, let's just check the game. It's the final round, and Caruana managed to win the game, despite I think not even having realistic chances for first place. I'm not quite sure, but the way Fridman played was also quite interesting because he played very ambitiously. He sacrificed a piece for a very good practical compensation, some passed pawns, and actually even got chances to win the game. But I would like to show you how Caruana defended, thoroughly, and being very stubborn and try to set problems which Fridman, I think, in time trouble didn't even manage to solve, and after which he even ended up losing the game. So the game was e4, e6, so French defense, d4, taking the center, d5, attacking the center, knight c3, developing. Of course, there's also this very popular idea. Let's put it into screen here. Bishop b4, which is called Winawer variation, which is also very interesting. And for example, now this pawn again needs protection because knight takes c3, bishop takes c3 removes the defender. Therefore, let's say something like e5, and after c5, a3 takes, for example. We have, I think, one of the basic positions of the Winawer variation of the French defense. Knight f6 is the classical way of fighting this setup with knight c3, which is the classical variation. And having the knight developed here on f6, white can just push it, playing e5, gaining space, and similar to the King's Indian, using the dislocation of a knight to push it back, to push the pawn and simply gain space. Knight retreats to d7 because after something like knight h5 or knight g4, the knight is just lost, and knight e4. I don't think it's playable, but it looks very dubious. I mean, after something like knight takes c4, d takes c4, this pawn here might be a permanent weakness, and I don't think that the black can really hold everything together. I mean, one idea might be something like bishop e3, and then go for queen g4, and the bishop cannot leave, and the pawn is attacked. If the queen goes to d5, maybe c4 is an option. So it's very interesting. I think white's simply better here. Therefore, knight after d7, f4, gaining more space, and we have a kind of pawn chain here now. We can call it a French pawn chain because the pawn on e6 and d5 from black's perspective, and the pawn on e5 and d4 from white's point of view. And as a general rule for what beginners are taught, there's a general rule which states that you should either attack a pawn chain at the base, which means the pawn on d4, or at the peak, which is the pawn on e5. And two ideas which come to mind if you try to break this pawn chain are f6, f7, f6, this hook here, and the other idea is playing c5. And actually, with c5, you direct all your forces against this point d4. And as we will see, usually black tries to play c5, knight c6, and the queen to b6, putting three pieces, the knight, the queen, and the pawn on c5 against d4, and trying to reduce white's central control by forcing him or luring him into something like d takes c5, giving us one of his central pawns. So that's black's basic plan, and he has several ways to execute this plan. After c5 he can first take here, or usually white tries to back it up with c3, so just to keep the pawn on d4. But in that line here with knight c3, this is of course not possible anymore. So c5, knight f3. Okay, white knows that he cannot play c3 right away, so he protects the pawn with a piece. Knight c6, just adding pressure, Bishop e3, also going for the control over d4. Queen b6, which is an interesting line here. There are some other alternatives which are even more common. I mean, with bishop e3, queen b6 looks logical. I mean, first of all, is according to our plan, putting pressure on d4, and additionally using the fact that bishop e3 has a very serious drawback, which is it leaves the pawn on b2 unprotected. That's certainly true. But there are some other alternatives which I would like to check briefly, so you get some ideas, of how to play this position, which themes and ideas occur from time to time, and also some of the lines which are relevant for the discussion of this particular game. So one idea is to exploit the immediate fact that bishop e3 left the b2 pawn unprotected by playing queen b6. Another idea is saying white has firm control over d4. I could now take it. Simply reduce the central control of white, and after c takes d4, knight takes d4, and then play queen b6. Once again, hitting the pawn on b2 and adding pressure on d4. And this small nuances, this move transpositions and let's say move orders, are very, very important, because small nuances determine the position and positional character. For example, now this knight here is pinned because before we had the pawn here on c5 and d4, blocking in a way the queen's line of effect, or I don't know how to put it in words. She simply didn't threaten away the bishop here. But after taking queen b6, after removing the pawns c5 and d4, the queen has a very, very serious, let's say, very, very serious post there on b6, because the knight cannot move if, for example, knight takes c6, queen takes e3 with check, and it's just a complete disaster. I mean, f4 is hanging. This knight is also going to be it's just to capture, and if, let's say, comes like queen e2, for example, or bishop e2, even later on this pawn will simply fall. Let's say, I'll put it like bishop e2, maybe even, or let's maybe even say knight e2, just to protect the pawn. And after b takes c6, black ends up with an extra central pawn, extra pawn here, which he can move to c5, controlling d4, and having a very, very powerful center, and simply being a piece up. You didn't even have to pay material. You didn't have to invest material in order to gain something like this, and black's position is just completely winning here. So after queen b6, queen d2 is one idea, just to protect this knight here. And then the game Karyakin against Nakamura in Zug 2013 continued like queen takes b2, grabbing the pawn, but white certainly gets some initiative for it. The rook b1, it improves his pieces and hits the pawn, the pieces. So after queen a3, bishop b5. And it's a very, very playable, I think. I mean, it's white simply enjoys a lead in development. He has very, very good center control. The queen is exposed, might even play sometimes rook b3. If this bishop once disappears, knight b5 is also an option, and threaten all these dark squares here. So, maybe one thing which holds black's position together is this bishop here, because especially pawn on the square on d6 is very, very vulnerable, and if white manages to establish a firm control with knight on this post, he would probably be just much better. And Nakamura managed to draw this game, but it was very interesting if you try to look for some ideas here. A6 was also played, and the game Karyakin against Topolov in Kiev 2013. And I would like to show this game because it was in a way a miniature. Karyakin won very, very quickly after queen d2, b5, d takes c. Usually I advise not to take before this bishop has moved, because after d takes c5, you simply, in a way, give your opponent a tempi for free. After bishop takes c5, you can develop the bishop in one go. Bishop d3. And now an interesting move, which certainly was even played some time ago, sometimes I think, d4. And d4, I don't know, I must admit that black's position got worse very, very quickly here, and it's not that easy to play here. For example, after knight takes d4, looks like a piece sacrifice, which in a way it also is. Knight takes d4, and knight e4. In a way, just threatening to take on c5. And after taking on c5, just to pick up maybe this one, or settle it down here on e4. If the bishop moves, for example, if the bishop b6, you can go to 96, and the king is not caught in the center. So that's one plan. Queen h4, bishop f2. Also, very, very nice and important tactic to remember is that after g3, black maybe even has knight f3. Using the fact that this square f3 was weakened by g3 before it was controlled, and now check, and okay, after going there, he can probably take here. White has to re-establish material equality, taking there and taking here on d3, maybe even. I'm not sure if it looks okay. I mean, it's certainly still a weakened structure here, and this pawn here on h4 is not a very good plus for white here. I guess after something like, I don't know, maybe rook b8 and bishop b7, white does not have much to show here. I mean, even if this bishop cannot prevent to exchange it probably, because the bishop is very, very active here, and if exchanges it, it just gives black more time to develop his pieces, and simply much better. So bishop f2 was played instead, and after queen g4, the queen was attacked. Bishop takes d4, and in a way we could say that white's position is in a way just strategically winning. The reason being that, as I mentioned before, if white could exchange the dark squared bishop, he would have total control over this dark squares here. It's very, very dangerous. He didn't exchange it, but in a way he still plays it as if the bishop wouldn't be there, because after knight d6 he just distracted the bishop to d4, so knight d6 is playable. Check, king e7. The king is just caught in the center, and with very, very active pieces as white has. I mean, he just need one move to castle, and he will simply enjoy a very nice attacking position. I mean, it's completed development. Black has certain problems developing his pieces, because in order to do this, he would have to play bishop b7, but then I would say thank you and just pick it up. So therefore, Black has some problems to coordinate his pieces, especially the rooks. They're very inactive. H8 does not play, A8 does not play, and it's very difficult to solve his problems here. And after bishop e4, attacking the rook, so therefore we have a discovered attack, and going for this bishop here. Bishop takes b2, rook b1, hitting the rook and the bishop. And after bishop a3, top of let the rook, let white take the rook. And after bishop c5, again to stop white from castling, trying to get some compensation based on this uncastled king, but to be honest, he has in a way 3 pieces which do not play and do not participate in this attack, and without them he can forget about an attack at all. Bishop a3, and white was simply an exchange up. Queen to3, a6, knight e4, hitting the bishop, and if the bishop moves again, then queen d6 comes, replacing the bishop at the knight, and having very, very strong control here over the position. Rook d8, rook d1. So additional to all those problems, also pinning this knight, because if he moves, white attacks the rook twice and gives immediate checkmate. Bishop e6 in order to defend the rook and protect the rook, but after queen b4, the game is still decided. I mean, the problem being that f8 is cannot enter f8. If he moves one of his pieces to c5, white will simply win a piece because he attacks it twice. And if the king goes to e8, we have knight d6, hitting the king and forcing him to enter one of those dark squares on which white's queen reigns. And if he goes to f8, he takes with maybe even with check here. Yeah, let me see. He might go there. Yeah, it's possible. Check. Discovered attack with the idea, and very, very beautiful idea, after bishop c5. You might think that if white moves because the queen is attacked, knight on c8 is just hanging, and he could maybe pick it up. But it's not at all that easy because queen takes c5 finishes black off. Check. If the king goes to g8, let's say if he goes to e8, queen e7 mates. If he goes to g8, knight e7 is a monster move. I mean, wherever the king goes to h8 or f8, the knight takes the queen with check. And simply lost completely. For example, now white can even give everything, take and pick it up, and it's completely winning here. So therefore Caruana resigned. And that's just for you, just that you see one or two ideas which are possible and maybe even sometimes reoccur in this position, because black has certain plans available, and it's important that while you analyze the position and calculate position, and that you have all these plans in mind, so don't forget about them. But after queen b6, as happened in the game, there's an interesting line which involves a piece sacrifice to get some passed pawns here. Knight a4, queen a5, c3, and here also the game's often deviated. After c takes d4, which is also still possible, and b4, we have an idea similar to the game which we are discussing now. Knight takes b4, takes, and bishop takes. After bishop d2, otherwise known as knight d2, black just takes on e3. Bishop d2 and castle. The game in Caruana and Draken in Moscow 2010 was very, very unclear. Certainly Andrei even managed to win the game, but it's obvious that black has certain play here. I mean, for example, if knight takes d4, not just saying thank you, black says thank you as well, because now if the bishop takes d2, one important feature, a tactical feature, is also visible. The queen is overloaded, which means that after queen takes d2, the knight can be taken. And black's just 2 pawns up, which is enough to win the game. This is one idea. Another idea is also similar to the game, which we'll see in some moves without the move b6, is immediately c4. And after b4, to play queen c7. As in the game Almasi against Voikov in Nakhchivan 2011. It was also very, very typical and also, typical game for this structure and for the ideas of this structure. So I advise you to take a look at these games. But now let's go for the text move here, and also a very, very interesting one. b6. The main idea, I guess, is just to free the bishop. Now I can go to a6 to exchange his potentially bad bishop, or actually, in a way, it's a bad bishop, against white's good bishop. And also, after c4, to have an idea maybe sometimes of playing queen a6. So let's move on. Bishop d2 and c4. So we have a similar position compared to immediately c4, to knight moves c4, but with the moves b6 and bishop d2 included. And this certainly, I would say, gives him some additional power. Because after b4, knight takes, let's say queen a6 was also played in a game Kokarev against Voikov. 2008, queen a6, bishop e7, bishop e2, bishop e7, cancel, and the position was very, very close. I mean, in the end it was drawn, and I mean, it's very, very strategic here probably. There isn't much tactics going on. Therefore, Fridman decided to take on p4 to create a very interesting imbalance. So bishop takes b4. And the structure which arose gives some very good practical compensation, because in a way it reminds me of the Noteboom variation of the Slav defense, and its main idea to create this passed pawn duo a5 and b4. And here it's similar. I mean, okay, it's not necessarily this aforementioned pawn duo, but in a way it's also very dangerous. And I mean, these pawns are running and they simply come, and as we will see, the pawns advance very, very quickly. Queen c2, bishop takes, knight takes, b5, hitting the knight and just pushing him back. Knight c3, b4, knight d1. And as you can see, black made certain progress. I mean, he's in a way, if you count pawns, he's still material down. But that's not the point here. I mean, he has very dangerous passed pawns. And with less pieces, I would say, if white does not manage to blockade them, it's very difficult, because he can sometimes even sacrifice a pawn, to free his remaining pawns, and it's getting very, very tactical. I mean, even in endgames, tactics tend to occur from time to time. And it's simply not that easy as it looks like. And I think it's a very good practical decision, and maybe the position is quite good for black already. I mean, the pawns look very, very dangerous, and what white tries to achieve now is at best to force some kind of a concession. Because after queen b6, for example, let's take in the first position without arrows, if he manages to force black to push, for example, c4 to c3, then the light sequence will be weakened, and he can establish a very good control over them by playing knight b3, and maybe later on knight to c5. Of course, not now, because knight still protects it, but later on, controlling very important light squares. The same goes with b3. I mean, if b3 is played, b4, b3, then the dark squares are weakened, and white would try to create a blockade on this squares. So the position is very demanding. You need to play very precisely as white in order not to get steamrolled by these pawns. And as we see, he manages to force a kind of a concession and try to blockade them with a very promising position. But in the end, he just simply blunders. I mean, he maybe even overestimated his chances. After queen b6, and the pawn on d4 needs protection, so knight e4, knight f3. castle, and now, very important, a novelty. Before it was played bishop e2, and after something like f6, e takes f6, knight takes f6, castle, and I just show you some ideas. Knight e4, and the game was against Jaworski in ICC for the correspondence chess. White chose not the computer's first move, I think, but something that gives him a very solid edge. Just taking. And yeah, black had difficulties proving some kind of compensation for it. The bishop e7, queen e5. Now keeping an eye on the dark pawns and on e6. Bishop takes f3, rook takes, and rook f5. After queen e1, it would have been bad to play queen takes d4 because after knight f2, the pawn on b4 and e6 are hanging, and if he tries to defend both of them, the queen d6, White just plays g3 with the idea of rook d1 and rook e3, maybe even knight g4, knight e5, having a very good control over the dark squares here. Therefore rook d5 was played, and after a3, again forcing kind of a commitment here. After b3, king h1, rook a to d8, rook c1. White was just much better. Therefore, I don't know if Caruana was still in his preparations. He played a3. a3 immediately blocks, it threatens the pawns, and with the idea that a5 is just not possible, just trying to keep with the idea of trying to keep this pawn duel, because after takes, he reveals the hidden point that the rook on a8 is hanging, which means that after a takes b, black does get his beloved pawn duel, but after rook takes a8, he's just a piece down. And whenever this bishop moves, he just takes, and maybe even sacrifices, giving a piece back. So this takes, and queen takes. He neutralizes now this dangerous pawn duel, and okay, b3, then knight b2. And yeah, white simply stopped all threats. It's just a rook up. Next move is just castle, and he's just winning here. So after b3, queen d2, and as I mentioned before, one idea was just force some kind of a concession here, just to force a weakness, and in that case, the knight from d1 does a very good job in protecting these pawns here, controlling both dark squares b2 and c3. And now, with the king side or queen side being rather stuck, white should try to shift maybe to central play with h4, g4. So after f6, remember what I mentioned in the introduction. You have to attack the pawn chain on the base or on the peak. And here after f6, h4, knight b8, regrouping the knight maybe to c6 to add additional pressure here on d4. h5 came, and probably he underestimated now a bit his play, because after a5, h6, white gets some kind of initiative. He's weakening some squares here, now always threatening to take, and this h7 pawn needs protection, permanent protection. So kids, don't forget, use protection. Rook a7, knight c3, with the idea that always if b2, rook b1 just picks up the pawn. Knight c6, rook d1, rook a to f7, e takes f6, and now probably one of the first mistakes which might have cost him the game. G takes h6 was preferable, because after rook takes h6, rook takes, the best is probably just to take and play g3 with a rather unclear position. White is so busy stopping the pawns from rolling, and that I don't know if he can create real own play. These pawns are also weak, so it's very unclear. Might be that black starts much better here, so it's not very simple to evaluate this position here. G takes f6 is maybe worse, because the pawn h6 is very good in cramping this yeah, whole dark square here, and especially if he somehow manages to, I don't know, maybe knight h4, knight f5, and somehow maybe try to control the square of queen a2, queen g4, it's always very, very dangerous. The rooks also need to protect them, and it's not easy to get counterplay. After g3, king h8, bishop h3, yeah, a rather long maneuvering game you started. I guess they were in time trouble, which explains some slow maneuvering here. I will just skip that part and go to the 14th move here. Let's just briefly move here. And here, so let's have the bishop e8. Let's again start with the commentary. Queen d2, knight d6, rook e2, e1. Both sides managed to reach time control, and yeah, what white will try to do is to play g4. But it's certainly very, very risky, because it opens up his king's position. And with the rooks here already close to his king, this looks very, very dangerous and not very appealing to me. After a4, the bishop does a very, very good job in protecting this pawn, and with it altogether, this pawn chain here, g4. So it's, as I mentioned, it's very risky, and as you can see, it's not easy to defend here, because I guess he underestimated his attack. F takes g4, bishop takes g4, rook takes, and now knight f5. The knight is very, very strong there, so he exchanges it off. Rook takes, queen e3, centralizing the queen a bit, and ideas such as queen g3 are possible. And while watching the game, I thought queen b7 might be an interesting try, just with the idea of transferring the queen and controlling the 7th rank. And take something like queen h3, adding pressure on h7, king f8, for example. I wasn't sure how I should assess this position. Well, I thought it might have been better than what happened in the game, because after something like, I don't know, king f3, obviously rook h5 just wins. Therefore king f2, and if the queen goes to f2, now rook h5, queen takes e6, king h1, knight takes d5. The computer gives even a perpetual, which is quite interesting, because this looks so completely dangerous. I mean, white sacrifices everything just to centralize his knights and try to create some threats here, and it's very, very difficult. I'm not sure if any human would have played like this. I mean, king f2 is very dangerous, difficult to find probably. Something like king f3 looks more not natural, and after rook h5, yeah, it just looks completely, it looks just as if white's completely busted. I think the difference between the other line is that after queen takes e6, rook takes, knight takes d5, there might maybe even be bishop h5 here. And this knights do a very good job in controlling very, very important squares. And maybe even something like this. Maybe it's just bishop f7. Because if he takes, it's just lost. And if he doesn't take, I mean, he doesn't have any checks. He can check on d7, okay, that's all. Maybe that's the only way to play for something, but I think after this, and if queen g4, just going back, this knight is just hanging. And that's probably the difference, that on king f3, there's this pin here, and after king f2, there wouldn't be any pin if the knight takes on d5 here. That's, I guess, the difference. Yeah, so let's go back. h5 was played, and which is also a mistake because it weakens the king's position as well. And after rook g1, very important to create some counterplay. King f8 and queen g3 was probably best, with the idea that after king e7, queen h4, king f8, queen g3, both sides probably has to go for this repetition. And after knight f3, queen d6, I don't see any. I mean, the queen gets back into the play, and white's just completely tied down here. And after knight e2, he needs, all his pieces are rather passive, and certainly needs something like a simple plan. I mean, okay, the knight can go to e5, okay, but what else? I mean, this pawn might also be very dangerous, and not only this pawn, but also this pawn is very dangerous. And maybe even after c3, c2. The game would end very soon. So that's the difficulty in analyzing and assessing these positions, because there are so many tiny details which both sides have to consider that it makes this whole line very, very dangerous to play. I think maybe king e7 might be an idea, and if king f2, okay, queen takes a3, therefore queen c1. And as I mentioned, white's just passively protecting everything and holding his house together. And after bishop g6, king f2, bishop h7, knight g5, bishop g8, queen g3, queen e7. Let's just skip a bit. Queen h4, queen f6, and queen takes h5. After allowing white to take this pawn, I mean, this certainly has very, very good counterplay. And I guess it's again time trouble what decided this game, because c3 is a complete blunder. I mean, after knight h7, takes, white has a very strong attack. He's just threatening to play rook g8 mate. And after rook takes f4, knight takes f4, what black has to hope for is a perpetual. And after queen takes f4, king e2, queen e4, takes, king d1, very important, with the idea that whichever pawn moves, it creates a weakness, and white would try to control it. For example, if b2, then king c2, controlling the light squares. King f7, rook g5, king f6, rook e5, total control. If instead he moves c2, he's weakening the dark squares. And after, I guess I just skipped here the end of the game. I guess I just overwrote it. Okay, it doesn't matter. King e7, rook g5. I guess here the position is the final position where black resigned finally, because after b2 he weakens the light squares, king c2. If c2, then king c1, controlling the dark squares and just picking up the remaining pawns. And if he goes for e3, just rook e5, stopping the pawn, and after king d6, rook takes e5, king d5, rook takes c3, king d4, rook g3, cutting off the king, after e5, just king d2. Always eyeing with the idea of giving a check here, and in the end, not to move here and pick up the pawns, just winning the position. So yeah, it's a very interesting game. I mean, Caruana played his usual stuff. I mean, Fridman got ambitiously, sacrificed a piece, and obtained a very, very decent position, and even managed to have good winning chances. But I guess it was again time trouble which decided the game, unfortunately, because it would have been a very, very nice victory for him. To win against such a promising player as Fabiano Caruana. I mean, the decisive mistakes. I mean, I guess g takes f6 was not very, very good for black, and the other mistakes. Okay, f takes g4 here was very, very risky, and the next critical point was probably h5. As I mentioned, queen b7 might have been better. After which white has to be very accurate, to hold the position, I guess. After h5 it's dangerous because this king is also very weak now. And yeah, here, let's say, I guess he was the plan of king e7, where white might have had difficulties proving anything. I mean, okay, after allowing this opponent to take this pawn, one of its winning potential, one of his potentials to win the game has just disappeared. And yeah, okay, c3 is just a horrible blunder. He probably just underestimated this power. I mean, he has to go for this because otherwise the queen is hanging. And yeah, I guess he just miscalculated here. Despite being a very, very simple line even, I mean, it wasn't very difficult to see that knight h7 is playable and that c2 is not in time, or b3. And okay, perpetual after king e2. The queen does not have any squares to check here. I mean, e5 is not as accessible. She can check from e4, okay, and maybe even from d2. But after queen d2, I guess just king f3, because the queen controls the light squares, the king controls other squares, and the rook controls as an important square d1, after which rook g8 is still threatening. Yeah, that's probably it. Yeah, should be game over. I mean, you cannot really do anything. There's not any real squares. You cannot even check him. So yeah, would be busted. And yeah, in the end, it's very nice. No, this game is maybe even a kind of a model game of the blockading strategy. This might have been a very, very good example, but unfortunately the game was decided by other forces. And yeah, okay. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. It would be great if you could just leave a comment on my channel here on YouTube, Daily Chess TV, as well as visit my website here on dailychess.org, where you can find all these lectures here and also book reviews, chess-related book reviews. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.